Hello and welcome to this webinar on the Maryland Heritage Areas Program project grants for fiscal year 27. My name's Ariane Hofstad and I'm the administrator of the Maryland Heritage Areas Program. And I'm joined today by my two colleagues, Andrew Arvizo and Martha Waldron, who you will hear from in just a little bit. And here's our contact information if you need to reach us in the future for any reason. But today we have a full agenda. We want to make sure that we provide you with all the information you need to know about the program, but also to determine eligibility for applying for grants. And we're also going to spend some time walking through our application process to include some tips and also information about the online grants portal that you would need to submit to your applications to. So with that, I'm going to turn things over to Andrew and we will proceed with the rest of our presentation.
Thanks so much. So the first thing that I'd like to just point out is everything that you are going to hear about today is covered in greater detail in a number of reference documents that are included in the description of this video. The most important of which being the project grant guidelines for applicants, which walks through everything you need to know about applying for a Maryland Heritage Areas Program grant. In addition to that, you can also find a blank FY27 project application, as well as the FY27 grants manual that walks you through what steps will take place once you receive a grant. In addition, you'll be able to find a direct copy of these slides in the description below. Now, what I'd like to do first is go ahead and talk a little bit about the Maryland Heritage Areas Program so that you can feel a little bit more comfortable with the program and understand the background of the program before you go applying for the grant itself. And the best place to start, I think, is going to be looking at the purpose statement for the Maryland Heritage Areas Program, which is that the Maryland Heritage Areas Program designates, supports, and collaborates with certified heritage areas and their partners to create place-based experiences for the public that preserve and promote Maryland's unique stories and contribute to the well-being of local economies. And there's really three core areas of focus with which that purpose is achieved. And those are tourism, community enhancement, and sustainability. And as you're thinking about your projects and what type of project you'd like to move forward with, we encourage you to keep those core areas of focus in mind, as they're the core pillars that make up the application criterion. So that's the purpose of the program, but let's talk a little bit about the logistics of the program itself. The Maryland Heritage Areas Program is administered by or is housed administratively by the Maryland Historical Trust, but it is administered by an independent body called the Maryland Heritage Areas Authority. And this body is a unit of government that is nestled within the Maryland Department of Planning. Both the Heritage Areas Program and the Authority have four desired strategic results: that Maryland's diverse historic and cultural and natural resources within heritage areas are enhanced, preserved, and accessible, that heritage areas support equitable, robust, and sustainable local economies, that communities and visitors are connected and enriched by experiencing Maryland's heritage and cultural traditions, and that local partnerships and networks across heritage areas are expanded and strong. And it is these four desired strategic results that work towards a shared vision that guides the program. And that vision is that Maryland's rich and diverse heritage is shared and valued, deepening connections to the past, enhancing communities today, and inspiring future visitors and residents. Now, how does this happen? Well, there are three primary activities. The first being working closely with and designating local heritage areas. The second being awarding grants to organizations within heritage areas. And the third being providing technical assistance to organizations across heritage areas. Now, I've just talked a lot about heritage areas here, so what I'd like to do is take a moment to step back and really define what a heritage area is. And the best way to do that is with the simple definition that heritage areas are concentrations of historic, cultural, and natural resources And what's unique about them is that they are a partnership between local communities and the state level. There are 13 heritage areas across the state of Maryland, and they touch every single county as well as the city of Baltimore. Like I mentioned, they tie in all sorts of different historic, cultural, and natural resources, going beyond a traditional simple definition of heritage to include all sorts of different sites, museums, and all sorts of different organizations. And what's really great about them, beyond it just being a partnership between the local and state level, is that they are also completely unique, reflecting the character and the needs of local communities. You can really see this in the map of all 13 heritage areas, where the size and shape of heritage areas just outlines how significantly different they are. You can also see how broadly the program covers the state of Maryland. So no matter where your project is taking place, you're never going to be too far away from the boundaries of a heritage area. Now, as I mentioned, this is really a partnership between a state and local level. At the state level, the state provides capital and non-capital grants. It conducts statewide reviews of those grants. It provides technical assistance to applicants, and it offers funding to heritage areas to conduct mini grants. Then, at the local level, heritage areas administer those mini grants. They provide feedback to applicants, guiding them through the application process. They conduct their own local review that contributes to the overall review between local and state. And they provide exceptional technical assistance to all sorts of different organizations. So it is that partnership that really makes everything in this program work. Now with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to my colleague Martha to discuss a little bit about eligibility criteria.
Thanks, Andrew. As Andrew mentioned, one of the primary activities of the Maryland Heritage Areas Authority and the Maryland Heritage Areas Program is to grant capital and non-capital project grants. The number one question that you all should start with if you're thinking about applying for a Maryland Heritage Areas Program grant is if you're eligible. And this is our eligibility criteria. As an organization, you need to either be a nonprofit in good standing with the State Department of Assessments and Taxation, a local jurisdiction, or a state and federal agency to apply. Additionally, your organization needs to be planning a project that takes place within the boundaries of at least one heritage area. And I'll talk a little bit more about that momentarily. If you are wondering if your project is within the boundaries of a heritage area, I urge you to use the Medusa online mapping system. This is a wonderful tool and will help you verify if your project is within the boundaries of a heritage area. You can navigate to the URL on the slide, and if you would like additional assistance, you can utilize the helpful tutorial that is also listed on this slide. Furthermore, any of us on this call, Ariane, Andrew, or myself, are happy to assist you with finding out if your project is within a heritage area. When you're on Medusa, this is an example of what you'll see. You can click the Other MHT Base Data layer in the Layers tab, select the Maryland Heritage Areas layer, and then utilize the address search bar on the map to type in the address where your project will take place, and the layer will show you if you are in a current heritage area boundary. Now, some of you may realize that your project is not currently within the boundaries of a heritage area. And if this is the case, we still urge you to be in contact with the heritage area that is closest to where your project is taking place. It's very possible that that organization, or I'm sorry, that heritage area will love to partner with you, are happy to work with you in other capacities, and may be able to offer technical assistance in other ways. And we urge you to be in touch. Heritage areas do conduct boundary amendments from time to time, and we urge you to talk with that local heritage area and talk about that possibility in the future. Here is the grant schedule for the fiscal year 27 grant round. And this is important to keep in mind and mark on your calendars if you're interested in submitting an application. We will talk about the intent to apply multiple times throughout this presentation, and that's the first deadline that you should be keeping your eyes on. It's February 2nd. The intent to apply is a mandatory required form that you must submit in order to receive full access to the full application, which will be due on March 31st. After that, the review process will take place in the spring from April to June, both at the local and state level. Grant applicants will be notified on July 9th, 2026, which is when the grant round begins. And throughout the fall is when grant agreements are drafted, emailed, and executed for those who are selected for funding. And this is also typically the window when you can anticipate your first payment. There are two types of project grants that are granted from the Maryland Heritage Areas program: non-capital and capital project grants. And I'll talk a little bit about each of them. I also want to specifically say that all MHAA grants, whether capital or non-capital, require a one-to-one match requirement, which I will talk about in a little bit. I also want to mention that all grants that are funded through the Maryland Heritage Areas program are subject to a Section 106 review as a federal regulation for state funding. So first, I'll talk a little bit about capital project grants, and hopefully this is helpful to give you an idea of what activities fall under this category of funding. We like to think of capital project grants of having a lifespan of 15 years or more. And the type of activities that fall under capital projects are listed here on the slide: acquisition, development, rehabilitation, restoration, and pre-development activities. And each of these has, some subcategories and subsections that certainly can be mixed and mingled, but this is the general idea of what a capital project consists of. Capital projects may require an easement through our colleagues at the Maryland Historical Trust. And I do want to mention that capital projects do not have to be on a historic property. We frequently have a lot of capital projects that are not affiliated with historic property, and I don't want folks to think that this has to be a requirement to apply for a capital project grant. One of the important things to consider with a capital project is that consent from the property owner is required if funding is awarded. So please keep that in mind. If you're thinking of a project that takes place on a property that you don't own, you should be in touch with the property owner, let them know what your plans are, and if funded, you will need to provide a letter of consent from that property owner. Capital projects have a range of $5,000 up to $100,000 with, again, that required one-to-one match of non-state support, which I'll talk about in a little while. I mentioned that capital projects may be subject to an easement through the Maryland Historical Trust. And this is a process that we're happy to talk to anybody about more if they're interested. We're also happy to put you in touch with the easement program at MHT for more information. But the gist is that MHT preservation easement is only required for historic properties that are currently listed on or eligible for listing on the National Register. Even if your property falls into this category, it doesn't mean that you're absolutely going to be required to convey an easement. That is up to the easement committee at the Maryland Historical Trust to decide, but it is a possibility. The length of the easement term is dependent on the amount of your grant and the duration of the project. Again, we're happy to talk more with any applicants who are concerned or have questions about an easement requirement. Non-capital project grants on the other hand, are projects that are related to planning, interpretation, or programming. And some of the more specific activities that take place within those categories are listed here on the slide. So feasibility studies, wayfinding signage, seminars, festivals, all of these are examples of non-capital projects. For non-capital projects, there is a range of $5,000 up to $50,000 grants, again, with that required one-to-one match of non-state support. I do want to talk about ineligible expenses. It's important as you're building your budget and thinking about what you want to request funding for to keep in mind what you cannot use grant funds for. So first and foremost, unfortunately, this grant program cannot fund overhead expenses for applicant organizations. There is one exception to this. If you are a nonprofit applying for a non-capital grant, you are allowed to include an indirect cost line item in your project budget. This is limited to 15% of the grant funds that you request. So if you're a nonprofit applying for non-capital project, please keep this in mind. You also cannot spend grant funds on staff salaries. However, consultant fees are an eligible grant expense, and staff salaries are eligible to use to make up for that matching requirement. You cannot spend grant funds on marketing expenses. However, those marketing costs are acceptable to use as your match requirement as well. And finally, you cannot spend grant funds on alcohol. I'd like to talk a little bit more about the required one-to-one match. And we really urge you all to be as creative as possible when it comes to fulfilling this requirement. For every dollar of state support, $1 of applicant or grantee support needs to be contributed using any combination of cash or in-kind money. So I'll talk a little bit more and just give you a little bit more information about how that match can be fulfilled. I want to be clear that the match cannot be spent outside the grant period or on an unrelated project. And as I said, we urge you to be creative. So any combination of cash donations or earned income, for example, is a great way to fulfill that matching requirement. In-kind time spent on the project from staff, volunteers, board members, or partners can be used to fulfill that matching requirement. And lastly, any donated or discounted goods or services are another great way to fulfill that match. If you have any questions about the match or have concerns, again, please be in touch with us. We're happy to talk about your options and work through that with you all. One thing that I want to be very clear about is that other state funds cannot be used to fulfill your match. So for example, if your organization receives a grant from DHCD, the Department of Housing or Community Development, for example, you cannot use that money, even if it's on your project, to fulfill the match. So non-state support needs to be what you use to fulfill your matching requirement.
Right. Thank you, Martha. I'm going to spend a little bit of time now talking about the project grant application itself. We want to familiarize you with the different components and talk a little bit about the scoring rubric and just walk through some of the questions so you have an understanding of what to expect in the application itself. So for both the capital and the non-capital application, there are 3 primary sections. And then for the capital application, there is 1 additional section. The 3 primary sections are project information, budget information, project impact. And then for the capital application, there is an additional property information section. So you can see those outlined here. In addition to those sections, there are also supplemental information requirements that are asked for each of the applications. And we'll walk through those a little bit more in just a minute. For the review criteria and the scoring, we wanted to walk you through how the points are assigned to each section, so you really understand what it is that the reviewers are going to be looking closely at when they're doing their scoring of your application. The project information section is worth a total of 20 points, and that's divided between the project description that you'll be providing and the project timeline. The budget information section is worth a total of 10 points. And then you will see the project impact section makes up the majority of the points, coming in at a total of 70. And there is a breakdown of each of the questions within that project impact section and how many points are assigned to each of those questions. You will also find this scoring rubric in our grant guidelines. It's an attachment at the back of the guidelines that really breaks out this review criteria and scoring rubric for you in more detail if you want to reference that in the future as well. For the next slide, thank you. We're going to just spend a little bit of time on project information. Wanted to bring to your attention that there are some word limitations on a couple of questions, and to let you know that we'll be asking for a brief project summary. This is really just a short description. Who's doing the work? Why are you doing it? What are the deliverables and outcomes that you plan on completing? This just gives us a snapshot at 250 words. The project description is the lengthier question where you can go into more detail. You get up to 1,500 word limit there. We want to hear about the project that you're proposing, and we also encourage you to include any past or future phases of work that you feel would be pertinent for us to know. You know, if you've already done planning of an exhibit and you're asking us for the fabrication phase, you know, it's very helpful for us to understand that that planning has already happened. And perhaps you'll be asking for, you know, installment in a future phase of work. So understanding the sequencing of your project can be helpful. Also, any consultants or contractors that you plan on hiring, spelling that out in your project description will be very illustrative of how the work will get done. It's okay and very common for those consultants and contractors not to be selected at time of application, but just knowing that that's your plan for getting the work completed helps round out the picture for us. Also, what are the goals and objectives, you know, around the project? Why are you doing this? What audiences are you trying to connect with? Why is it a need that you feel needs to be fulfilled, you know, in your community or in this, you know, sector of heritage? If there are pieces of information around the sustainability or the maintenance of the project, we are always interested to hear that, to know that there's a long-term plan for its future. The timeline and schedule. The timeline that you illustrate in the application of the proposed grant-funded work should really be matching up the activities that you listed in your project description. So for any activity in that description, we'd like to see a matching timeline of how that work will be completed and the sequencing of that. One thing to keep in mind here is that no work that you're requesting grant funds for can start before July 9th, 2026, because that's the date that all applications would be approved and no work could start before then. All right, the project impact questions. This is that section where I said the majority of the points are assigned, 70 points, 7 questions. So let's just walk through these in a little bit more detail to give you an understanding of what to expect. The first question just asks you to identify the types of assets that are going to be enhanced or preserved. And this is simply a list with check boxes, and you can check all that apply. What you'll see there is a list of historic, cultural, natural resources, as well as archaeological assets. We'd like to know that as well. So that's a very straightforward, easy to answer question. The second question is about audiences. We'd like to know who the target audience is and what the anticipated participation or increased engagement is for that audience, and also how the project will be made accessible to them. When you're answering this, keep in mind that we'd also like to hear if there's any provisions that will be made for people with various physical abilities as well. The third question is about the information or connections that you would like visitors to make when they experience your project. And for this, we encourage you to really provide some qualitative examples, such as, will they walk away with an increased sense of pride in their community, a deeper understanding of a particular aspect of history, maybe a certain highlight of a particular type of architecture, or will a new or enhanced body of knowledge that's specific to the heritage area be brought to light through your project? For capital projects, for this question, we'd like you to explain the importance of what is being restored or built and how it might be contributing to, let's say, a historic district, the preservation of original historic fabric, and will supporting that capital project also help support the surrounding area in the future? You know, for example, will it be a venue for community events or programming, or providing a resource, you know, to the community that hasn't been in place up until now? For the fourth question, this is really focused on how your project is going to help fulfill the mission of your local heritage area, including heritage tourism. And you'll see in the application that there is a direct link in the application where you can find the mission statements of each of the heritage areas. So you can read that for yourself and then start to articulate how your project supports that particular heritage area. And when it comes to enhancing the heritage area and thinking about heritage tourism, consider how your project's going to help sustain that heritage area. And that can also include economic, environmental, or cultural aspects of contributing. We'd like to hear about that. We'd like to know if this is a new or a refined offering that you're bringing or proposing to bring to the heritage area. And then any quantitative examples, such as the cities, towns, communities within the heritage area where this project's going to be taking place, how many volunteers you anticipate helping with the project, or paid jobs that may result from the project would also be helpful to know. And remember, when you're thinking about paid jobs, that includes consultants as well as any staff that may be working on the project as well. For the fifth question, this is all about partnerships. We're curious to know how the project is going to help establish or strengthen partnerships and really support regional and local cross collaboration, you know, among different organizations, different partners. So please keep that in mind, as well as an expansive view on partnerships. You know, these could include businesses, it could include members of your community, and hopefully includes your heritage area. You know, those should all be considered potential partners that could be working on the project. For the next question in the impact section, we'd like to know how your project addresses diverse or inclusive historic narratives and or practices. So in addition to explaining, you know, which aspect of Maryland's diverse historic, cultural, or natural narratives that your project might be highlighting, we also encourage you to consider if the project you're proposing is going to assist your organization with addressing any work that it might be doing to promote diversity, equity, and inclusion. For capital projects, consider if the project is going to include hiring small or minority-owned businesses, and if the new space will eventually hold public programs or events that are going to support diverse or inclusive audiences and narratives and programming. For the final question in the impact section, why does this project need to proceed at this time? What will happen if the grant is not awarded or only partially funded? This is the urgency question. This is where we want to hear from you. Why do you need this money? Why do you need it from MHAA? And why do you need it now? It's very important that you articulate the need and the urgency behind your project so that we can get a better understanding of how funding from the Maryland Heritage Areas program could really help move this project forward for you. And with that, I'm going to spend a little bit of time on project budget questions. These are pretty straightforward in the application, and Martha already touched on a few of these, but wanted to just let you know that we will be obviously asking you for the requested amount. The match amount will be a 1-to-1. It'll be the same amount that you are requesting from us. The other item that you can provide information on here is about other project costs. So often your project is going to, there are often situations where a project costs more than the amount of funding that you're asking from us, even beyond the amount of the match. We understand that some of these projects are quite large and that you will be receiving funding from other areas. This is where you can fill in the other project costs associated with your project. One important item here is we only want you to list non-state funds here. If you have other state funds that are contributing to the project, we don't want you to list those in the Excel budget template that we provide. You can mention those in your narrative if you like, but in the Excel project budget, we only want non-state funds listed under that other project cost column. Couple of other things to keep in mind with the budget. As I just stated, we need you to use our Excel budget template that we provide. There is a place for you to provide additional budget information. There's both a text box and a place for you to upload documents. That's where you can tell us if you do know your source of match. That's wonderful. We would love to hear that. It's okay if you don't at time of application. It's not required, but it will be something that you will obviously have to fulfill if you do receive an award later on. For capital work, this is where you would provide any detailed quotes or estimates from contractors or explanation of how the budget expenses that you list in your budget were determined. It's always helpful for us to understand where those numbers came from and to really see the backup documents to help support that. For supplemental information, a couple of items that we wanted to review. If your project will be taking place on land that's owned by the Maryland Department of Natural Resources, then you need to get a letter of support from them. And there is a process for doing that where you work directly with them. There is a form. We're providing here an email for you to reach out. And we'd like to know that you have that support in place when you submit your application. If it's in process, we will accept that as well. We'd like to know that you have started the communication with DNR and that they are aware of the project that you're proposing. For education projects, we'd also like a letter of support if you're going to be working with any school districts or particular education institutions. Getting a letter of support from the Maryland State Department of Education or local schools, letting us know that they are on board and enthusiastic about the project that you are proposing is always something that is required and important for us to see in your application. And then resumes, CVs, letters of support. For anyone that's working on the project, having those resumes and bios attached is good for rounding out your application for us to see who will be completing the project, what their expertise is, what they're bringing to the table for the project. Letters of support from elected officials or other community partners is not required, but we certainly encourage it, and it is something that always helps to strengthen an application. And lastly, on supplemental information, for nonprofit organizations, everyone is required to submit organizational documents in the form of articles of incorporation, bylaws, proof of nonprofit status. Even if you've applied before, even if you've received an award before, we need you to submit organizational documents with every application. And if your project is an archaeological project, we need to make sure that you understand there are certain guidelines that are issued by the Maryland Historical Trust that you will need to adhere to. In the application, there will be a checkbox for you to indicate that you are familiar with these guidelines and that you understand that your project would be subject to additional review and requirements. And there's also a link to those guidelines that will take you to the webpage where you can read them more carefully if you have not seen them before. And that wraps up our application and supplemental information. And I'm going to turn things over to Martha to talk about review process.
Thanks. So once you submit your application, as Andrew mentioned at the beginning of this webinar, there is both a local review and a state review of your application. These scores that are generated by these review panels are combined and then are placed into a ranking of projects that are then submitted to the Maryland Heritage Areas Authority as a recommendation for funding. If you have more questions about the review process, and as we've mentioned, questions about anything in this webinar, please refer to the project grant guidelines for more information and for a sample of that scoring sheet that Ariane mentioned and started to walk through the criteria that will be used to review and score your application. That's available to you. So I'm going to talk about just a few things that we really encourage all organizations to think about when they decide or think about deciding to submit an application to the Maryland Heritage Areas Program. And then I'll talk about some tips and advice that we have for organizations as well. The first thing that you should really think about is, are you ready? Before you start writing, before you start putting together a budget, we really want you to think about if your organization is ready to apply. Why are you doing this project? What are your desired outcomes? Think about that timeline that Ariane talked about. Is there flexibility in the timeline to allow for receiving funds down the road, for receiving funds from other organizations down the road? How does your project that you're applying for fit into your organization's big picture or strategic plan, for example? Do you have buy-in from your board, from your partners? And what are the steps that you need to take to actually start, complete the project? Finally, who's going to actually be doing the work, managing the grant, including financial tracking, and completing the requirements of the grant, which are mid-project and final reports. And then again, that requirement for nonprofits is your organization in good standing with the Maryland State Department of Assessment and Taxation. If you go through all of those questions and you decide, yes, we are ready to apply for a grant, here are a few tips that we really urge you to consider as you're working on an application and building a proposal for funding. Number one is, do not wait to the last minute. Please give yourself plenty of time to gather the supplemental materials, like the estimates that Ariane talked about, letters of support, although not required. Take time to gather and request. So give yourself a lot of time to work on these. Start now, even, working on collecting these items for your application. If you're unsure, ask questions. You are certainly We hope in contact with your local Heritage Area Director. You're also welcome to always ask questions to Maryland Heritage Areas program staff, Ariane, Andrew, or myself. One piece of really helpful advice is to ask somebody who's unfamiliar with your project or even with your organization to read your application. I think this is a good piece of advice because your application will be read by a variety of people on the review panels who are not familiar with the intricacies of your organization or all of your plans. It will, I think, give you some perspective of how those reviewers will be reading and scoring your application and might identify some holes in your proposal that you can work on. I think another piece of advice that we've heard, especially from reviewers, is to give your project a unique and descriptive name. Although you're not scored on the name or title of your project, it does help distinguish your project from others that the reviewers will be reading and scoring. Although you're not required to have matching funds secured at time of application, please be sure that you have a plan to come up with this matching requirement. So even if you don't have all of the money in hand, knowing where you're going to request funds or considering where those funds are coming from is really important when you're putting together this application. We also urge you to answer the questions that are asked and don't just write what the reviewers will want to hear. Read the questions carefully and write succinct answers that truly answer the question. And then lastly, some piece of advice, if your project is primarily a planning grant or a project or a documentation project, focus on that planning, on how that planning will lead directly to a public experience related to heritage. So if you're applying for funding for a wayfinding feasibility study, talk about how that wayfinding will impact the visitors who are coming to your area or to your region once that wayfinding is hopefully in place. That will give the reviewers a bigger picture of how you're planning and how the funding that you're requesting for planning will turn into a public-facing project. Ariane talked a little bit when she went through the application components about your project description, the timeline, and the budget, and how they should all align. I think this is a helpful slide to give you an example of how you can align those three components and make sure that there's continuity between the three. You'll see in this first box, this is an example of the project description, and we've underlined a few key words that then pull through to the timeline and then into the budget. So if a reviewer is looking at your application, they can see that you're interested in funding an exhibit. You're going to be utilizing funds to pay consultants to design and fabricate the exhibit, and you're also going to be using funding to print brochures. Then, if you look at the timeline, all of these components are outlined. And when you look at the budget, each of these components are outlined again with associated costs. This is a really good way to structure your application to make sure that it's concise and the reviewers know exactly what you're planning to spend the state funds on. Here's a list of action items to prioritize when it comes to submitting a Maryland Heritage Areas Program grant for fiscal year 27. The first piece, which I spoke about at the beginning of this webinar, is to submit your intent to apply by midnight on Monday, February 2nd. The intent to apply form is available online, and Andrew will talk more about accessing the grants portal and give more detailed instructions about how to start that intent to apply form momentarily. Even before or while you're submitting your intent to apply, at some point, we really urge you to read through that project grants guidelines document, which is available on our webpage, and use the checklist we provide, and then add to that checklist if necessary. As we've talked about, we really urge you to talk with the staff at your local heritage area about how your project aligns with their mission and their goals, and also to receive some technical assistance from them when it comes to creating your proposal. Ask your legislators, your partners for letters of support. Again, if you don't own the property where your project is taking place, if you're applying for a capital project, talk to the owner of the property now about that letter that will be required if you receive funding. If your project is on DNR property, start that approval process now. And then finally, start building that project budget. So gathering quotes, estimates to really make sure that you're providing solid and reasonable, realistic numbers when you submit your project application. I think it's important to talk about the availability of funding for this fiscal year. The Maryland Heritage Area Program distributes approximately $5.1 million in grants each year. And on average, we receive about 200 project grant applications. Out of that 200, we fund approximately 50%. This gives you an idea of how competitive this program is. It's certainly not meant to discourage you, but we do want to be transparent about the competitive nature of this program and how much funding is available. I also want to mention that the grants review panel can choose to award partial funding if, for example, you have an ineligible line item or there are questions about components of your project. We are going to be hosting a number of info sessions for the fiscal year 27 grant round, and we urge all of you to attend these. They're going to be in a smaller format. We want you to come with specific questions about your project, which we're more than happy to discuss and answer. We're hosting a handful of virtual sessions in January, and then after the intent to apply is due in February, which will focus specifically on completing the full application. And then we're also hosting an in-person Q&A session and a grant writing workshop in partnership with the Rural Maryland Council on the Eastern Shore in Easton on January 13th. The call-in information for the virtual Q&A sessions are available on the webpage, and we do ask that you RSVP for the in-person session at the link on this slide. I think it's helpful to talk about some of the other funding opportunities that are out there. There's never enough funding for the wonderful projects that you all are doing. And so we urge you to look at some of these other sources as an opportunity to request additional funding for either the project you're thinking about for this grant program or others. A great place to start is with our colleagues at the Maryland Historical Trust that administer several grant programs, all of which are available to read more about on their website. Some, for example, include the African American Heritage Preservation Program and the Museum Assistance Program, which is relatively new and reinstated for this current fiscal year. There are a couple of general operating support funding opportunities that are out there, although they are few and far between. If you haven't already, we encourage you to look into the Maryland Hadza Memorial Shine Grant Program, which is run through Maryland Humanities. And if you fall into an arts and entertainment district, definitely look into those operating support grants that are administered from the Maryland State Arts Council. I've also put on this slide county and city grants, and right here we've just put an example for if you happen to be located in Anne Arundel County or in Annapolis, but your county and your city may have pockets of funding available for you to apply for. So look into some of those local jurisdiction grants. They are a good source of funding for some smaller projects or some very specific projects that your jurisdiction may be interested in as an area of focus. And lastly, we've put some preservation-focused programs that are typically run at the federal level. Definitely check in to see what the status of these programs are. The National Trust for Historic Preservation is obviously a wonderful place to look for funding for preservation-focused programs and projects. And we also have listed here the African American Endangered Sites Matching Grants Program and the African American Heritage Preservation Foundation as specific focus preservation grants. And then finally, I do want to mention, Andrew spoke briefly about this. Each of the 13 local heritage areas conduct their own mini grant program using funds from the Maryland Heritage Areas Authority. So please be in touch with your local heritage area director to learn more about these. They are smaller funds, smaller pots of money that are available for non-capital projects, and they might be a really good fit for you. So again, speak with your local heritage area director about your application, but also about other sources of funding. And with that, I will turn it over to Andrew to talk about the grants portal.
Great, thank you. So this year, Maryland Heritage Areas program has a completely new grants portal from that which was used in previous years. So what I'd like to do is go ahead and talk through how to create a new account, then how to submit your ITA and full application, and just generally how to use the portal. So as I mentioned, the first thing you'll need to do when you log in is going to be to create a new account, since this is a completely new portal. And to do that, you'll navigate to the portal and then click the Create Account button. We recommend, as you're creating your account, that you use SSO or you use your email address for the account creation. We have had a number of problems with both the Google and Apple logins, but if you have any issues there, please reach out to us and we can coordinate with you to see what kind of workarounds we can make. When you're asked to sign up, you will be asked to provide a password as well as your first and last name, and you'll be able to create an account with just that information. And one point of note is that the application tends to work best with Chrome, Firefox, and Edge. Those are the best browsers we recommend using to access the portal. Now, your second step when you are in the portal is going to be to begin your intent to apply form. That intent to apply form is available at the link that is on the screen here. And as you have heard several times now, it is a required first step if you want to submit a full application. So all you would need to do is navigate to the link on the screen here, and then click on the intent to apply link. And finally, you'd want to click on the Start New Application button that's highlighted in the bottom right. The deadline, again, for that ITA is February 2nd. And again, nothing that you put in that ITA is set in stone. So if you're even considering submitting a full application, we ask that you please submit that ITA with the knowledge that you can change anything in that intent to apply should you need to. When you click the Start Application button, you'll be taken to a short eligibility quiz that will go over the two pieces of eligibility criteria that you heard earlier, whether you are performing a project in the heritage area and whether you are a nonprofit or government entity. Upon completing the eligibility quiz, you'll be taken to the intent to apply form. This is a short 2-page form that walks you through what kind of project you're proposing, and you'll be asked to just fill out each question as you make your way through the form. You can see here that there are 2 pages or 2 tabs on the top left-hand side, and you can navigate freely between those tabs by clicking on them. Now, when you're ready to submit your ITA, please know that once you click the blue Submit button, that is a final submission. You won't be able to reopen it or anything. So when you're ready to go, please review your work, then click the Submit button, and you'll know that it has been submitted by 2 ways. First, when you look at the ITA in your portal, you'll see a small green check mark, and it will say Submitted. And second, you'll receive a message from the portal that lets you know that the ITA was submitted successfully and that you can begin working on the full application. Now, what if you want to save your ITA and return to it? Well, you can do so by saving in the portal. And then when you return to the portal, you will see the name of the ITA in your grants portal. You can click that name and it will take you to the ITA right where you left off. So what happens after you have successfully submitted your ITA? Well, first of all, you are welcome to submit, or you're welcome to begin working on your full application as soon as that ITA has been submitted. Now, in the meantime, you may actually receive feedback from your local heritage area director on your ITA, or you may want to reach out to your local heritage area director to begin a conversation about your application so that you can see if there is any feedback before you move into that full application. And again, the deadline for that full application is March 31st, 2026, but we just want to stress that there is nothing that you have to wait for to be able to start working on that full application. Once you have submitted that ITA, you're welcome to begin starting working as soon as you're comfortable. And again, this is the message that will show up letting you know that your full application is available. Once you see this message, you are good to get started. And this is how you'll be able to access the full application. So whereas before, when you were working on the ITA, you would have only seen that ITA section. Once you submit the ITA and the full application is available, it will show up underneath the ITA form, and you'll be able to just click that hyperlink there to open up the project grant application. Now, one resource that is available in the portal is that you can actually share your application with heritage area directors. So if you want to share with your heritage area director, what you can do is go ahead and click the Manage button, followed by the Manage Applicants button. Once you have the email address of your heritage area director, you can paste that email address into the Add Applicant tab of the Manage Applicants pop-out, and then you'll click the blue Add button. This will allow your local heritage area director to review your application live. They'll be able to see changes that you make whenever you save your application. So as you're working through your application, you'll find that there are a number of fields that are required. And you'll find that the application is a number of pages to work through. We want to make sure that you don't miss any required fields. So a number of these required fields, whenever you do not fill them out, they're going to throw the red error that you see here. Now, we've in the past had folks have a little bit of difficulty finding sometimes where these required fields are. The good news is in this new portal, all you need to do is click on the hyperlink associated with the question. So you just click on the blue text of the question, and it will snap you directly to where that required field is. That way you can make sure that you're hitting all of the required fields in the application. Now, even if a field is not required, that doesn't mean that we don't want you to fill it out. In fact, more thorough and complete application is always going to have a better chance at being awarded funding. So please take a look at all of the fields that are available, but those errors are explicitly for the required fields. Now, when you do submit, you are going to receive a confirmation message, just as you did for the ITA. And again, I want to stress that those submissions are final once you hit that submit button. So please take plenty of time to review your application before you click submit. Once you have submitted, it's entirely possible that you will not hear back until that July 9th date. But if there are any questions about your application, if there are any concerns or need for clarification, you may hear back from either Heritage Area Directors or most likely Maryland Heritage Area Program staff, who will be reaching out to see if there are any clarifications that can be provided. And with that, I will go ahead and turn it over to Ariane to wrap us up.
Great. Thank you, Andrew. Thank you to everyone who joined us today, joined this webinar. We hope that it has been helpful in helping you understand more about the Maryland Heritage Areas program, how to determine if you're eligible for applying for grants, and the application process. As we have said multiple times, we are here to answer any questions you have. Please reach out to us. Please use the resources that we've provided in this webinar, and also contact your local heritage areas for more information. We thank you for all that you're doing in the realm of heritage, and we are here to answer your questions, and we look forward to hearing from you.